Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erin Gallagher, and I'm the Chair of Acquisitions and Collection Services at the University of Florida. I'm also a Charleston Conference Director, and I'm so thrilled to be here again for another rousing Charleston leadership interview with Katharine Macy. So, Katharine, introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Katharine Macy. I am currently the Interim Associate Dean of Scholarly Communication and Content Strategies at Indiana University, Indianapolis, and I also happen to be the project director for the O'Neill Project, so Open Negotiation Education for Academic Libraries.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that you're here. And we'll just get started right away with what is your library origin story? Because I'm interested in what was your relationship to libraries before you started working in them?
Well, it's interesting because my grandmother actually went back to school to become a librarian after years of being like the head of like the English department of a high school in Eastern Washington. And she went back to become a librarian and was a community college librarian for several years. And then, and so, I grew up very much valuing libraries and all of that. And the first time I was 25, when I was 25, I kind of was, I kind of want to be a librarian. And I shared that, unfortunately. And then my dad didn't get it at the time, and I didn't have enough like wherewithal for me to go, hey, I want to do that. And so instead, I got my MBA. and um, and I was working in the private sector, and I guess kept thinking about it, and I was really reevaluating my life in my early 30s, and realized that my favorite part of my job was teaching people how to find and access and use information. And that teaching aspect of my job, even though I was doing lots of other things, like my actual title was analyst, that was what I wanted to do, which led to me deciding to go back to library school in my mid 30s.
I really love that. I can't help it, my heart sort of soars when I hear how folks had a love for libraries and maybe didn't come to it right away, but that love is very strong and we tend to come back around to it somehow. We tend to boomerang back to it. But also, your grandmother sounds like the coolest. I love that. I think I always kind of fantasized about, having a grandma who was a librarian. So I love that.
Well, and it's very funny because my dad was her son, but he just didn't get the work. And it's funny because now it goes, this was the perfect job for you. I never said that to you. And I'm like, yes, you do. I know what intersection I was parked at or waiting for the light to change out when you said, I don't think that sounds like a great idea. He has turned around now and he goes, oh, this is so complex. It's very funny.
Oh, it's fun. It is fun to try to describe my job to my family too. It's like, but okay, so you mentioned that librarianship is your second career. So, what were some of the skills that you picked up through your work in the private sector that helped you succeed in academia?
Well, number one, I would say there's a couple things. One is project management. And also, like libraries, like many organizations in the private sector, are fairly flat. And so it's really about managing across, down, and up to get anything accomplished. And so I think those are big key skills. Process analysis, and that's really coming in handy now. And it came in handy when developing the O'Neill curriculum of how do you go about developing a business process that people can use and learn from and is repeatable. And I spent a number of years trying to help figure out how to do that, and it's about being curious and learning about the work itself and going, how can we best do that? And then lastly, I would say my analytical skills, which has allowed me to do I was a business librarian, and so as a subject liaison to business, really helped me in the classroom understand how students were accessing our resources. But it's also helped me figure out and wrap my arms around how to best understand our collections. And so I took on a role as a collection assessment librarian and really creating processes and frameworks such as our collection scorecard so that we can be better at making data informed decisions and do it quickly without, especially considering we have so many different data sources coming from everywhere and none of it talks to each other. How can we actually bring it together so we can do that? And lastly, it's just like my negotiation skills and working actively with negotiations, as well as the formal training I had when I was getting my MBA. And all of that I was able to bring to help manage first my collections with business, and then helping my library wider, and then expanding that to be able to help other people develop those skills as well.
So here in learning more about your background, it's now making a lot more sense as to why the O'Neill project has been so incredibly successful. And it's making me think that I wish that everyone who went to library school could take some kind of a class that's meshed the best of the best from business practices in with the, the soft, squishy warmness of librarianship. I think you had a real advantage there. So
I think the challenge there is I think they try to in the library management class, which I got out of because I had an MBA. Um, but I did, the issue is, I think always, it's just, number one, I think if we look at library science programs, largely, like if you look at the faculty themselves, some of them are practitioners, especially if they're adjuncts, but the faculty themselves are researchers.
yeah, yeah.
And what does it mean to actually like operate and work in a library, and then distill that into various skills, and in a very, and how to do, I have an entire 2-year degree in management, and then 10 years of work experience that I was able to bring there. How do you squish it into like a 3-credit class? And it's just one of those things, I think. But I think there's that opportunity where we can try to figure out, how do we make more library focused training that helps us develop those skills, which is part of what I was doing with O'Neill. Is because if you look at all of the existing negotiation education out there, a lot of it isn't necessarily library centric, and we have special unique things, such as the fact that we're a small world. Even if a vendor rep leaves that vendor, they're probably going to another vendor,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to see them again.
Mm-hmm.
And those relationships carry over. It's, in many cases, we're dealing with oligopolies and or sole source. Somebody who is the only producer of that type of information. That in itself invites different dynamics.
Yeah.
And so it's not the same thing as going, hey, you can just go out there and get another bid.
Mm-hmm.
It's a slightly different environment. And anyway, I'm rambling, but there's so much I could talk about with this.
Well, I mean, we could talk hours on negotiation and education there, and I mean, you're totally speaking my language too on how it's so difficult to learn that unless you learn it over an accumulation of experience, because there's uh, there's only so much that you can do, that you can like play house with before you have to really get in and do it for real. And often it's one of the 80 things that you're doing as part of your job, and so negotiation is something that you might do a couple times a year, and then you don't do it again because you do all the other 79 parts of your job. And so yeah, but we'll get more into that. We met, our genesis of how we met was back in 2018 through the Charleston Conference Up and Comers program. And so you've now gone from a Charleston up and comer to a leadership interviewee, which I think warrants some congratulations. So how did that up and comer recognition impact you?
Yeah, I really had to think about this. And I actually went back to look at my interview and my profile that I wrote up. And really like thinking about it, and I had certain goals that I had communicated, which informed my nomination, and I really appreciated the recognition. But writing that feature really helped me kind of like think about the change I wanted to bring. And one of the things I wrote about is, I specifically said I want to empower all librarians to plan and conduct principled negotiations. I'm a believer in that everyone can and should participate in this process. I believe the bulk of the time should be spent on the planning, which enables productive conversations that will lead to fair deals for both vendors and libraries. And I've done it. Like I've put together a project and a team and people throughout the library community, including yourself, Erin, who have helped participate in the creation of an education curriculum that can empower all of us to have better and more sustainable conversations. And I'm a strong believer. Some people go, what if vendors see this? I'm like, I don't care if they see it. I'm not teaching anything that's rocket science. I am like me and the various other people that had created pieces of the curriculum, we're basically distilling like the best practices that we know around these things. And I think all of us having that on both sides allows us to have better conversations and really be able to, you know, more fruitfully figure out what works for us and what doesn't. What are our boundaries? What aren't our boundaries? And so that way we're not wasting each other's time and we can figure out how to move forward better into the future.
Well, I love that. I love to see a, you know, success story and a dream come true. We don't often get to see that, so that's exciting. But speaking still, you know, of the Charleston conference, are you a regular attendee?
I tend to go every few years.
Okay.
I'm always trying to figure out which conferences to go to
Yeah.
every year, and we almost always have somebody who goes. And sometimes it's divide and conquer on who on the team gets to go. But I always really value going in the fact that I can have fruitful conversations with libraries as well as vendors. I always go the way I approach conferences is what are my current problems and the things I'm trying to understand and solve, and use that to plan what I go and see. Like this time, I was focused on three things. I was focused on AI, I was focused on understanding people's experiences with transformative agreements, and I was focused on textbooks affordability.
Mm-hmm.
And went and saw great programming. And so while at the in-person conference this year, and was able to bring that back, and it's created some food for thought for us as an organization. And so when I can go myself, I always find it valuable. I presented several times at the conference and on various topics. In the past, it was more geared toward business librarianship. I do find it a valuable conference since we always want somebody to go. It's a matter of who gets to go this year. Sometimes more than one person goes, but you know how it goes. It's libraries.
Yeah, and it depends too, kind of regionally. Like, you know, Charleston, I can drive there, so it's a definite that I'm going to go every year. But yeah, I know that uh, with the limited funding that we get, perhaps you know, travel funding from our university, sometimes you got to make those tough choices. But it sounds like you're doing it right in really doing that pre work to see which sessions you want to go to. I'm going to take a cue from you next year and not overload myself to where I have a hard time even fitting in sessions. That's one of the
I didn't say I didn't overload myself, but I'm really happy that there's the virtual option for
yeah.
me to catch up on the things that there were a couple times I said, you know what, I need to take a break right now. Or there was the afternoon I was presenting, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I cannot focus on other people's presentations this afternoon. I have to focus on mine. And knowing that I can go back and watch the recordings later with this new virtual option, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I think it's just been a total game changer for a lot of attendees. Now, just to make time and actually dedicate the time to watching the virtual
Yeah.
sessions is my next challenge. Um, so we've been kind of kicking around library vendor negotiations, but you are absolutely a renowned expert in this area at this point, and we've both been out of our MLIS programs now for you know some number of years. But do you have a sense of whether principles of negotiation are even on the radar for current MLIS programs? And if not, what would that look like in an ideal world?
I think that people are starting to talk about it in some programs are. I also think it's a challenge for a number of reasons. One I've already talked about a little bit. One is they have very full curriculums, and where does it fit in? It has a tendency to be like a footnote in a
Mhm.
library management class, or perhaps a sourcing and acquisitions course. Um, but I do think that there is recognition that this is a necessary skill set. That too, they're very heavily influenced on the programs by what students demand. And do students know and recognize they need to develop these skills? And I think that that's a piece where I think we need to be better at when we have prospective students talking to us, helping them understand what the job is. And people really don't think about and go into librarianship thinking that they're going to be negotiating all the time. And if you're buying resources or licensing, you are. And the truth is, it's a skill set that can be also used with negotiating resources internally with your organization. It can be used when you're on the job. So I think one of the things that we wanted to do with O'Neill was make this lift a little easier by creating an open educational resource with lesson plans and materials that if a unit wanted to be integrated into a class, it could be. Or even if, even if it's not a formalized class and somebody puts together a workshop, or there's lots of ways people can develop these skills or integrate and use the curriculum in different ways for career preparation. So I'm hoping that this will help make it more part of the conversation, um, especially since so often the faculty, while there may be some library practitioners working as adjuncts, because there often are, a lot of people are actually library science faculty, and this isn't their area of expertise
Mm-hmm.
either.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we should teach this, but we ourselves have never had that training.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really hoping O'Neill will help with that, with the fact that there's some library centric case studies, and we're going to write more case studies. This work is ongoing. The grant technically ends at the end of December, but I don't think this project is ever going away, and we're going to be constantly adding and putting in more, and working with various members in the community to add additional materials, new case studies, et cetera, to it. So
Well, I can tell you it's already had impact on the library community. My statewide consortium here in Florida, we do our statewide negotiations in a team based format, and we are very keen to develop a cohort to go through the O'Neill curriculum together to strengthen our skills and our tactics there. And so, you're already getting some real attention with this, and I think it's filling such a huge gap. I don't fault the folks putting
yeah,
together programming in library science programs. You're right, they're teaching what students want, and we don't know that this is a skill that we might need. And also, not everyone going into librarianship, I would even argue that this is a far more specialized skill than reference or instruction, or something that it's very likely you're going to be doing at some point in your library career. So it's so needed. And on that note, I will actually ask you about O'Neill more specifically, because I was so fortunate to be a pilot participant in the O'Neill, building project. And by the way, for folks who aren't familiar, this is the Open Negotiation Education for Academic Libraries project. I was really floored by the amount of thought and energy and effort that went into building and developing the curriculum. So, really quickly, I mean, I know that you've talked about what it's like in its current genesis, or its current format, but what sparked this idea, and what has been the reaction from the community?
yeah. So basically, I was just kind of floored at how little negotiations was discussed. And when I just started as a subject liaison for business, I knew that I had a very limited budget and I wanted to renegotiate some of my own licenses. Um, and I knew that we only have a handful of people who are doing that work for the entire library. So I went ahead and handled it myself. But I was just thinking that, we all could be having these conversations and be working. And I was having active conversations with my dean at the time, David Lewis, and he's like, how do we advocate and negotiate better with the vendors and try to change so we can create more sustainable relationships? And I just kept thinking that we all have to help and participate in this. Because to ask one or two people in a reasonably sized library, like I am at an R2 institution, it's a bigger lift than that. And I really felt like all librarians and library workers could benefit from these skills. I also think it helps us negotiate that for better salaries, help reduce wage compression, negotiate with our campuses. I just think it's just a necessary skill set. I've actually had people, I started developing training internally for my library. And we formed a resource negotiation working group where it was professional development to train other librarians to help us with negotiations. And they have taken the skills and used it to buy houses and cars and other things, because you start thinking about it differently. You're really learning, like, basically how to better prepare and then how to better communicate while you're doing it. And so, yeah, that's basically, I did some work. I got involved with Spark and with the negotiation community of practice. And And I also started presenting and doing this training at as a pre-conference for another conference, Electronic Resources and Libraries. And that led to me doing some work for Spark to do some education training for members. And then I wrote some recommendations how Spark could develop some ongoing education, and they said, "Hey, why don't you write a grant and get it done?" So I did, and I brought a team of people together to start and get this. And I really did. I wanted to create a curriculum that anybody could access and develop the same skills I developed when I took a class with when I was getting my MBA. And that's my goal.
What's really amazing is that, Katharine, you've opened up our eyes and sort of given us a peek behind the curtain into business negotiations, which is really the foundation that we need. We're very few of us, I think, in librarianship got here through. Well, I'm sure there are several people who got here through business, but not everybody. And people who made it here through English or poetry or something like myself. I think thought of that as sort of like a big scary Wall Street type thing, or something that was out of bounds for me. And so to
Mm-hmm.
make it so accessible to people who need those skills and who maybe don't always feel so confident in just winging it, because
Mm-hmm.
the implications, the outcomes are sometimes just so tremendous and have such an impact on our institutions. So yeah, making that accessible, making it user friendly has been, I think, just such a boon to us. And I'm so glad also that you were working with Spark, because I love those negotiation community of practice calls. I've become more involved with them myself as well. And you're also an inspiration in just like getting it done, getting an idea, getting a grant, getting it done. So really, that's I think that should be an inspiration for all of
Those
us.
project management skills. If
Yep.
somebody wants to get something done, they give it to me because I will figure it out. And it's been great because I've gone to conferences and had other participants go, my boss has told me, walked up to me and said, I've seen a marked difference since doing the pilot study. I've talked to members of another consortia where they have a group of people going through the curriculum together. And it just really, I'm glad people are finding use in it. And it just like hearing that and hearing that impact is just, I think, really great, because I think we all can negotiate, and everything is negotiable, by the way. You go to Best Buy, you can negotiate, believe it or not. I, like developing the skills, like it just helps you, I think, navigate the world, and also not take it so often. I think people they get anxious and they make negotiations. They're afraid that if they don't do well at it, it's about them.
Yes.
It's
Yep.
not. Like, don't do it. Don't take it personally. It
Mhm.
is a business relationship, and spend a little time planning, even if all you do is figure out your goals for a conversation, what your boundaries and your limits are, and what you want to make sure you stay centered around, like your deal or no deals. Um, when you go into it, just doing that little bit of work enables you to have a better conversation and move things forward into the direction, or walk away and not take it like, hey, we failed, or accept something that you're not quite thrilled about, but it's within in your balance. It's not about you. It's about knowing what you can do and whether or not you met the goals or not, and what you can't do. And for me, that bit of planning, that work, really allows you, like, to just have the conversation and hopefully not take it home at the end of the day. Because I think so often, like, we go, however it goes, um, we want to take home whether or not we did well or not. And I'm like, it's just a business conversation.
Catherine, we need somebody to tell us this all the time, not to take it personally. I will tell myself that 1,000 times, and then I'll still beat myself up about what I think was a less than, stellar interaction, or it wasn't a total win. So it's something that you sort of internalize, and it's very hard.
And I will say it's not perfect, but I'm like, as much as I do this, I sometimes have a conversation where I leave it and I don't feel great.
Yeah.
That happens. And you go, that just went off, you know, off kilter. But the fact of the matter is, still, ultimately, you're making
Yeah.
a business relationship decision. And you go, you know what, this isn't about me. And yeah, we had a misunderstanding. But I think really it's just trying to like center yourself in that. So you don't like personally, it's not about whether or not you're a good or bad negotiator. It's just,
Mhm,
it,
mhm. I love
I
that.
also would say like one of my best practices that I suggest to everybody when you're negotiating um, is reflective journaling and really just writing about what went well, what went bad, what you could do different next time, and just get it all out there and written on paper and leave it on that paper and just know that you can learn from that as opposed to going, hey, I shouldn't have said it that way, or it's more of like, hey, how can I learn? And you will slowly over time uncover things that will help you learn and be better at doing this, at doing negotiations.
That was my absolute favorite element of the O'Neill pilot, and also one of the most valuable things I took away from it, which is that I now do journal about this process, and I'd never done that before, and I don't know why it seems like such a, well, gosh, why wasn't I doing this all along? Because it really, it kind of helps, if you feel sort of angry or not so great about an interaction, it's almost fulfills the same thing as type out that angry email, but don't send it. You're exercising the demons, but you're not impacting anybody else in that way. So I appreciated that advice. But I poked you enough about negotiations. So here's a fun question. This is always my favorite. What's the best book you've read this year?
I will tell you, it's funny. I'm just came back from vacation, and so I was prepping for this, and I realized I don't remember what I read this year, and I had to go to look at all my like library accounts and my Amazon accounts and go, what have I read this year? And so the book I'm going to recommend is a book by Kat Bohannon, and hold on, I'm getting the title because it's long. The book I'm going to recommend is Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution by Kat Bohannon. And it is fascinating. She is a researcher. I want to say like an evolutionary anthropologist, but I might be slightly wrong there. She's a scientific writer, and she basically looks at the evolution of female mammals from ancient times to the present and how and why it drove all human evolution. It's a fascinating book. I really like
Oh,
enjoyed it.
that sounds awesome. That sounds, I can get into just about any kind of nonfiction if it's written as like a really good story. If
Yeah,
I'm tricked into thinking that I'm just reading a fun story, so that sounds really
yeah,
fun.
and it's like you have a chapter that talks about the development of like mammary glands and like the first mammal that had it, and it's woven into like this story that tells you about that creature, and it's just fascinating because there's so much that has driven to where human beings are being today.
Oh, well, we are amazing. Women, I mean, we're amazing. So, so my last question is always a question I ask everyone, because this was, but my interview mentor Tom Gilson always asked this when he was doing the Charleston interviews. Is there anything you wish I'd asked that I didn't?
Oh, I I I think you asked a lot of different things. I guess something you could have asked me was, who's your favorite poet?
Ah, okay. I'm gonna ask now. Who's your favorite poet?
W.H. Auden.
Oh, love, love, love Auden. Oh, I love that.
My love of poetry very much comes from my grandmother, who was the librarian. Like, I just remember being a little girl and all her books of poetry that were on the shelves, and just like, being 8, 9, 10 years old and pulling them off and reading those books. And honestly, that love of poetry and my was what got my dad interested in reading back when he was a little kid, because she helped him fall in love with like the old English lyrical ballads, um, things like the Highwaymen and that type of thing.
Oh,
And so yeah,
that's
totally not negotiation related,
yeah.
but
No, but I do love that. There's I think there's something very soul soothing, sort of, there's always a little bit of romance, even if
yep.
the poem itself is the topic isn't, overtly romantic. There's something about it that always makes me feel connected with nature, connected with the past. just connected with other humans, but I can still be by myself with a cozy book and my cat and a cup of tea. So
Yep.
we love that. Well, Katharine, this has been so wonderful. Thanks for taking time to talk with me and for sharing so much about the work that you've been doing and just about yourself with the Charleston community.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was fun. And it is really amazing that I wrote a goal and I made it happen in 6 years.
You heard it here, folks. It can happen. I love that. Thanks, Katharine.
Thank you so much.